How to sew the flower blocks from the Sampler Quilt Block of the Month by Amber Makes. Follow me and I'll show you how to make 3 of the prettiest flower blocks. Available in 2 colourways, China Blues and Country Garden. Cutting out. Take the fabric panel from your kit and give it a press. Use some synthetic starch if you've got some, just to give it some stiffness. Now you can see that all of the fabric pieces are labelled with the label above them. So fabric 5, fabric 7, fabric 8. It doesn't matter which colourway you're using, it will all be laid out in the same way. You will also have 1/2 metre of plain fabric that's used for the background. Now cut out all of the fabric pieces. I cut them just outside the line, so on the white section, but keep the label above them for now, so that while you're cutting out all the pieces, you remember which fabric is which number. This is really important, so you use the right fabric piece for the right pieces, because as you can see, they're all different sizes, and they are a little bit bigger than you'll need, so that there's room for a cutting allowance. Now follow the instructions and the measurements that are in your printed instructions, your kit, to cut out and label all the pieces. Now I've printed out the labels just so that you can see them more easily, but you can just write these labels onto a scrap of paper and then pin or clip them to the pieces so that you know which is which, because a lot of the fabrics are used for more than one of the blocks. So when you cut them out, it's really important that you label them and just follow the measurements and cut out all the pieces, and then do the same with the background fabric. Once you've cut all the pieces, we're going to make 1 block at a time, so it's much easier at this stage if you arrange them into the 3 piles, so that you will have 1 pile with all the daisy block pieces, 1 with all the sunflower block pieces, and 1 with all the blossom block pieces. But because you've labelled them all, it's really easy to just sort them out and put them into piles. Taking the time now to cut everything out and label it makes constructing the blocks so much easier, because as I said, some of the same fabrics are used across the blocks, so that you get a really coordinated look when you finish the whole sampler quilt at the end. So put them into the 3 piles for the print fabrics. I'm just rearranging mine here so I can see them. I put them in a vague size order, just so I don't lose any of the pieces. You can always go back and check against the cutting to make sure you've got everything. And then when you've done that, take all the background fabric, your pieces that you've cut, and place those all onto their relevant piles. And then keep the piles separate so that you can make 1 block at a time. So here you can see all the daisy block pieces in 1 pile, all the sunflower block pieces in another pile, and all the blossom block pieces in the 3rd pile. You're ready now to start sewing. How to snowball a corner. This technique is used in all of the blocks, so I'm going to show you how to do it here. Take the big piece of fabric and then the smaller piece of fabric that you're going to use to snowball the corner, and on the wrong side, draw a diagonal line from one corner to the opposite corner. The instructions will tell you where to place the line and where to place the small square on the larger square. In this one, I'm snowballing the top left-hand corner, but the instructions will tell you how to do that for each block. Pin that into place, making sure the raw edges match up from the smaller square and the larger square, and then sew together along that drawn line. When you've done that, fold the corner over of the small square so it meets the corner of the large square. Always fold and press before you cut, and then you can make sure that it all matches up exactly. Once you've done that, fold back the top piece of fabric, and then the 2 fabrics beneath, that's the seam allowance, trim that to about 1/4 of an inch, because that reduces the bulk. And then fold it back and press, and that's a corner snowballed. As I said, the instructions will tell you where to snowball a corner, but this is the method used when it says that in the individual instructions, and it will tell you what piece to place where. How to make Four-at-a Time HSTS. These are half square triangles and are used in the blocks. Take the 2 fabric pieces listed in the instructions and place them right sides facing. The 2 fabric pieces will be exactly the same size, so match up raw edges and pin them together all the way around. This method is used in some of the pieces in the blocks, and the measurements and the pieces that you need to use will be listed. Now sew them together using your 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around all 4 sides. So now the 2 pieces are sewn together all the way around. You need to cut them. So cut them from one diagonal corner to the opposite corner. If you place your ruler at the corners, just move them across. Now without the move of the fabric, turn your cutting board. If you don't have a rotating mat, then just turn the board and trim them the other way from one corner to the opposite corner. You now have 4 triangles. If you open them up, you can see these are all half square triangles now that we call HSTs. I like to open them up first and then fold the fabric. You normally press towards the darker fabric. It doesn't really matter when you've got 2 prints like this, but fold them towards the same print each time. And then give them a press so that seam lays nice and flat and that you folded the fabric all towards the same fabric. So you've got your half square triangles, but they now need trimming because they're bigger than they need to be, because you always trim them afterwards so you get exact sizes. So take one of your triangles and put the diagonal line of your ruler across the diagonal line. And I'm going to cut this one into a 2-inch square. The measurements are listed in the instructions. So cut across the top and the right-hand side, turn the square round, and then trim it the other way. Match up the markings on your ruler. So in this case, the 2-inch square to the left and the bottom, and then trim it on the right and the top. And now you have a perfect 2-inch half square triangle. Repeat that to trim them all to make your half square triangles. How to make 8-at-a Time HSTs. So this is where you make 8 half square triangles in one go. So take the 2 pieces of fabric that are listed in the instructions, and on the lighter piece, on the wrong side, draw a diagonal line from one corner to the opposite corner. I'm using an erasable pen for this, but you could use a pencil. And I'm doing it on the lighter one just so it shows up. Then draw another line from the other corner to the opposite corner so that you've got 2 diagonal lines on the wrong side of one fabric piece. Now place the 2 fabric pieces right sides facing. They're cut to exactly the same size so that they will match, and match up the raw edges. And then pin them together. Now you're going to sew 1/4 inch either side of these lines so that you can keep the pins in place when you're sewing. If you pin them in the centre of one side, then you can keep them in place while you're sewing without needing to remove the pins. I do pop a pin in the centre though, because it helps to hold them together, and you will have to remove this one. Now, as I said, you need to sew 1/4 inch either side of both diagonal lines, which you can do using your machine foot so that you get it exact. But if you prefer, you can draw these lines in. So just place your ruler and mark a 1/4 inch to the right of one diagonal line. And then turn it round and mark a 1/4 inch to the other side of that diagonal line. So now you've got 3 lines. One line will be for cutting and the other 2 will be for sewing. If you've got a machine foot that's a 1/4 inch wide, or you just want to judge it, then you won't need to draw these lines. But if you're new to doing 8-at-a Time HSTs, then I would draw the lines in to start, and then you will get a really accurate finish because you can just sew along the lines, which is a lot easier. So once you've drawn them in, sew along the 4 lines, 2 lines either side of the diagonal lines, and then it will look like this. So you can see I've got 4 lines there. Now place it on your cutting mat and cut along the central drawn diagonal line, so between the 2 sewn lines. Don't move the fabric, but move the board, and cut along the other line, the other diagonal line, the one that's between the 2 sewn lines. And now you've divided it into 4, but in order to divide it 8, keeping the fabric still, turn it around again and cut vertically up through the centre. Use your ruler, lines on your ruler, to make sure it's straight and at right angles. Cut right through the centre and then turn it round again, and again cut vertically up through the centre, using the lines on your ruler to make it sure it's straight, and making sure that you cut right through the centre point. And you have now divided your 2 squares into 8 triangles. And when you open them up, you can see these are all half square triangles. So you now need to press them. So press the fabric, you can just finger press it to start with, over to one side towards the darker fabric, or with these print fabrics, which are pretty much the same shade of colour of print. Then it doesn't really matter then, but just press them all to the same side. So you can see I'm pressing them all upwards. I find it easier to finger press it open and then press it first. So that's 2 done, and I've pressed the other 6 in advance. So there's my 8 half square triangles. Now they need trimming to size to make them accurate, because you always cut them bigger, sew them bigger and then cut them later. The instructions will tell you what size to trim them to. For this one, I'm going to trim them to a 2-inch square. So place the diagonal line on your ruler along the diagonal line where it's sewn and centrally, and then cut across on the right hand side in the top. Turn the half square triangle round. Now match up, because this is a 2-inch square, the 2-inch markings at the left hand side in the top, and then trim on the right hand side of the top. And I'll show you that once more. So line up the diagonal line on your ruler with the seam line and place it centrally. Trim along the right and along the top. Turn it round 180 degrees. Match up the markings, so the 2-inch at the left and the bottom. And now you can just trim off the right hand side and the top edge, and you've got a perfect 2-inch half square triangle, so that when you make your blocks they will be accurate because you've sewn and trimmed these, and it's a much quicker and more fabric efficient way. So there's your 8 half square triangles all ready to make into your block. Let's start by making the daisy block, and first we're going to make the daisy centre. So take the daisy centre and the 4 daisy centre corners. Now, following the snowballing instructions that I showed you earlier, we're going to snowball each of the 4 corners of the daisy centre, and you can do these all at once. So remember, you need to draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of each of the daisy centre corners and snowball the top left, the top right, the bottom left and the bottom right corners. Go back to the snowballing instructions if you can't remember, and then press it all, and that's the centre of the daisy complete and ready to put into the rest of the block. Making the large petals. Let's start by making 1 large petal. So take 1 daisy block large petal and 2 daisy block star points. Keep the others together in a pile and labelled for now. Now we're going to snowball the bottom left and the bottom right corners. We'll start with the bottom left, draw the diagonal line on the wrong side of the star points and place that in the bottom left and snowball the corner, and it will look like this once it's all pressed. And then repeat that to snowball the bottom right hand corner. You can see it overlaps on the other star point, and that's how it should be because the 1/4 inch seam allowance is there. Now we're going to snowball the top left and the top right corners using the large petal corners. These are in the background fabric. So place 1 in the top left and 1 in the top right. Remember to draw your diagonal line and refer to the instructions, and they will tell you exactly where to place them. So the video tutorial just shows it to you, but if you want to see it all written and the exact placement, the instructions will tell you that. So place 1 in the top left, 1 in the top right, and snowball those corners. And that's 1 large petal finished. Give it a good press. And then repeat this to make 4 large petals in total that you will be using for your daisy block. Making the small petals. There are 4 of these and they're all made slightly differently. So take 1 daisy block small petal and take 3 daisy block small petal corners. Keep the others to one side and keep the labels on them so you remember which is which. Now we need to snowball 3 of the corners. So I've drawn the lines on my corner pieces first, so you need to snowball the top left, the top right and the bottom left, following the snowballing instructions at the beginning of this video. Once that's done and it's all pressed, it will look like this. Now take 1 of the daisy block short borders. You'll need the others, so put those to one side for the other petals. And sew 1 to the top. The short border goes on the top. So place it right sides facing, turn it over so the seams are uppermost and sew it together and press it over to one side, and then take a daisy block long border and sew that to the left hand side. So place it right sides facing, turn it over so the seam allowances are uppermost, pin and then sew it together. and that's the top left small petal complete. So to make the top right small petal, you need to snowball the top left, the top right and the bottom right corners. All of these details are in the instructions, so just follow them so you make sure you get them snowballed in the right place. Put a short border, sew that to the top, and then sew a long border to the right hand side. And then your top right small petal is complete. They're all made in a slightly different way so that they face the right way. So for the bottom left small petal, you need to snowball the top left, the bottom left and the bottom right. Then take a short border and sew this one to the bottom, and then a long border to the left. And then your bottom left small petal is complete. You can see I've pressed all the seams over to one side and then given it a nice press to flatten. For the bottom right small petal, you need to snowball the top right, the bottom left and the bottom right. And then take a short border and sew that to the bottom edge. When that's done, sew the long border to the right hand side. And that's your bottom right small petal complete. So you've now completed all 4 small petals that look slightly different but will complete your block. Assembling the daisy block. Take all the pieces that you've made and place them in the following order. So in the top row you've got the top left small petal, the large petal and a top right, and sew all the pieces together in the top row. And then the middle row you've got a large petal, a daisy centre and a large petal. Sew those pieces together, and then in the bottom row you've got the bottom left, the large petal and the bottom right. Once you've sewn the rows, sew the rows together. So you can see I've pressed the top row, the seams to one side, the middle row to the other side and the bottom row to one side. So it means that the seams will be facing in opposite directions so that you can nest the seams by butting them up against each other so that you can make sure. It's really important that those seams match. And then once you've sewn the top row to the middle row, sew the bottom row to the middle row, again matching and nesting seams. And there it is. I've pressed those seams open. Give it a good press so it's nice and flat, and your daisy block is now finished. Let's now make the sunflower block. We'll start by making the straight petals. So you need a sunflower block straight petal and 2 sunflower block straight petal corners. So just put the others to one side for now. Now we're going to start by snowballing the top left hand corner. So pin the corner into place and snowball it. So you've trimmed the seam allowance and pressed it over, and then take the other straight petal corner and snowball the top right corner of the straight petal. And you can see that it overlaps in the centre, which is how it should be, because that will be lost in the seam allowance when you assemble the block later. So that's the corners done. We now need to attach the base of the petal. So take one straight petal base, put the others to one side with their label on, and sew this along the bottom edge. So place it right sides facing, it's the same size, so match up the raw edges, and then sew together. And press the seam over to one side so it's nice and neat, and that's one straight petal finished. Repeat this process to make 4 straight petals in total. Making the corner sections. Take the corner petal leaf HSTs, the 2 pieces, and place them right sides facing and make 8 HSTs following the instructions at the beginning of the video. Here they are, I've made all 8 and I've trimmed them so they all measure 2 by 2 inches. Now put these to one side and take the 2 leaf and the background fabric HSTs that you've labelled. This is why it's really important that you label them. And in the same way, make 8 HSTs from these 2 squares. And I've trimmed them all so they're nice and neat, and place them to one side. Now this time we're going to follow the Four-at-a Time HST instructions using the corner petal base and the corner petal base 2 HST fabrics. Place them right sides facing, sew them together all the way around and trim them to make 4 HSTs. Now you can take all the pieces to make one corner section. So lay out the HSTs you need, the corner petal squares, corner squares and corner rectangles. All of the details are listed in the instructions so you can check that you've got everything. Now following the diagram in the instructions or looking at the layout here, lay out all the pieces. So you've got a rectangle at the top, an HST, a square, a print square, another HST. It's really important that you double check against the video or the diagram to make sure that you turn everything round so it forms the petal and the leaf shape. Once you've done that, sew the 2 pieces together in the top row, the 3 pieces in the middle row, and then sew the 3 pieces together side by side in the bottom row. Once it's done, it will look like that. Press the seams from each row in opposite directions because it will help when you nest seams to match them up later if you've pressed them in opposite directions. So now sew the top row to the middle row, nesting the seams, and then sew the bottom row to the middle row. Again, make sure these seams match up exactly so that you get a neat finish. Once that's done, I've completed one corner section. I press those seams open just to make them lay flatter. Then repeat this to make 4 identical corner sections in total, using all the pieces that you've cut before. Assembling the sunflower block. So now all the sections you've made you can join together. So for the top row you need a corner section, a straight petal and a corner section. Sew these 3 pieces together side by side to make the top row, making sure that you pin to match the seams so that you get a neat finish. And then for the middle section, you need a straight petal, the sunflower centre, which is just 1 square of fabric, and another straight petal. Join them side to side by side to make the middle row. And then for the bottom row, you need a corner section, a straight petal and another corner section. Refer to the block diagram or this video to make sure that you have your corner sections and your straight petals facing the right way so that you form the sunflower block, and do take care to match the seam allowances. Once you've made the top row, you can see I press those seams open to keep it flatter. The middle row, I press those seams open, and then the bottom row, I've pressed those seams open and flat. Now to complete the sunflower block, join the top row to the middle row. Again, match the seams by pinning them together and then sew it all the way along, and then join the middle row to the bottom row, matching the seams. Once you've sewn them together, you've now finished the sunflower block. Give it a nice press so it's flat, and your beautiful sunflower block is now finished. The blossom block. There are 2 blossom A sections and 2 blossom B sections. So we'll start by making blossom A, and you have to make 2 of these. So let's start by making the inner section of the blossom. So take the blossom, 1 blossom block inner and 1 blossom block centre. Remember, you're always using the A ones, not the B, but use the A. Now snowball the bottom right-hand corner, and then taking one of the blossom block A inner corners, snowball the top left-hand corner. You can do these at the same time because they don't overlap. They're only little pieces, but it gives you a nice rounded point to the centre of your blossom. Once that's done, that's one of your blossom inner square A's complete. You need to make 8 of these in total. You'll make 4 for one of the blossom A blocks and 4 for the other. So if you make all 8 now, then they're all ready to make your 2 blossom A blocks. So give them all a good press and then put them to one side for now. Making the petals. We'll start by making the straight petals. So take 1 blossom block blossom A straight petal and 1 straight petal corner. Snowball the top right-hand corner of the straight petal using the straight petal corner. I'm just going to pin it to place either side and then sew along the line to snowball the corner. This makes 1 straight petal, so give it a press and then repeat this to make 8 straight petals in total. and these will be used for the blossom block A's. So lay them all out, give them a press, and then you can put those to one side. Now to make the corner petals, you need 8 HSTs, so use the fabric pieces, the corner petal squares, and following the 8-at-a Time HST instructions at the beginning of this video, pin those two fabrics right sides facing with the drawn lines on them, and then sew 1/4 of an inch either side of the drawn lines, and then trim them to make 8 HSTs in total, and these are the corner petals. 4 of them will be used for one blossom A block and the other 4 for the other blossom A block. So now you've got your straight petals and your corner petals all complete. Assembling the blossom blocks. So take all the pieces that you've made for one blossom block A and place them right sides up. So you've got 4 pieces in each row and there are 4 rows. There's a diagram in the instructions you can follow or look at the video here to make sure, just double check before you sew them together that they're in the right order. And then take the pieces from the top row and sew them right sides facing. There's a little bit of seam matching to do. So when you get the snowballed corners, just try and match them. But because these squares are quite little and they're the same size, you'll find that the seams will match up anyway because you haven't got too much of a space to go wrong. So try and match them up, but they probably will sort themselves out. So there's the top row, row 2, row 3 and row 4. Once you've done that, do press the seams in each row in opposite directions. And then when you join them together, you can nest them by just easing them together, and that will really help to keep them in place. So join the top row to row 2, then row 3 to row 4 and join all the rows together. And that is one blossom block A complete. I press these seams open to keep this block nice and flat. Repeat this to make another blossom block A. And then you can make 2 blossom block Bs. They're made in exactly the same way, same process, same technique, just using different fabrics which you labelled right at the beginning. Joining the blocks. So take all 4 blocks and place one block A on the left and one block B on the right. And join these together. Try and get the seams to match up by pushing pins through them because that will help to get a neat finish. And then put another B on the left and an A on the right, and this is the bottom row. Again, sew these together, matching up the seams. So that's the top row finished. I've pressed that seam open to keep it flat, and here's the bottom row finished. And again, that seam has been pressed open to keep it nice and flat. Now all you need to do is sew the top row to the bottom row. Match up the seams by pinning through them as you go, and then sew together. And your blossom block is now complete. Give it a good press so everything is nice and flat. And you've now finished all 3 of the flower blocks.